I thought I would hop on this Instagram live because I was talking to my friend Shannon Watts this morning. Hi, everyone. Um, I also wanted to show you my new haircut. Just kidding. But anyway, I was talking to Shannon Watts this morning and we were discussing the federal legislation in response to gun violence in this country. And I think a lot of people, hello, Matt Braverman, a lot of people are confused about what it will exactly do. Thank you. I just got my hair cut. Thank you very much. Hello, Allison. Anyway, so I'm going to be talking to Shannon, and she's just going to help us understand what is in this legislation, what it does, and is it a step in the right direction. So, um, I was personally frustrated that it didn't do more, but as Shannon and I discussed, hi, Shannon.
Hey, Katie, I love your hair.
Thank you very much. I don't know. I'm trying, Shannon. What can I say? But anyway, I was telling the people joining us and our followers that you and I had a conversation this morning, and that I thought it was important that we share it with everyone else about gun legislation and what was done. You're in Washington, D.C. right now, and you were part of the, I don't know if it's weird to call it a celebration, but you.
Oh, I was celebrating all day long, including champagne toasts. And the reason why this was historic, it is so significant, but most importantly, it will save thousands and thousands of lives. And look, if you're going to be an activist, you have to celebrate every win, no matter how big, how small. And this was a very significant step forward on what is going to be a long path. It's not everything we wanted, but it is something.
All right, so can you explain pretty quickly, because I'm going to use this and cut it down, my team, and put it on all our social media platforms. Can you tell us, Shannon, what this bill does, or what this legislation does, and what it doesn't do, what it includes and what it doesn't include?
Yes, and I'm going to go through a whole list I have up in front of me because it's a lot of stuff. So, first of all, let's talk about funding for red flag laws. 19 states and Washington, D.C. now have these laws. And essentially, what it does is allow friends or family or police. It really depends on the state. Most states are family members and police officers. Some include teachers, some include therapists who can petition a judge with a temporary restraining order to remove the guns from someone who's a danger to themselves or others. Our organization started working on this almost a decade ago in California, which, if you remember the UCSB shooting, the family said, our son is armed and dangerous. Police said, there's nothing we can do. We wanted to remedy that. So red flags do that. 19 states and Washington, D.C. have them. However, it is just a tool in the toolbox. If you don't take it out, you don't use it. So we need to incentivize and implement these laws. And this new federal legislation gets $750 million to do that.
Well, let me ask you a quick
Yep.
question. Red flag logs. Let's talk about how they work in practical ways. So, let's say I have a friend, and that friend is acting strangely, talking about, taking his own life or something like that. Um, and how would I then notify the authorities that this individual should not be allowed to purchase a gun? And does that get into weird, like, privacy issues? I don't know. Can you tell us in
Sure.
practical that works?
So let's use a family member, because a friend, you would probably have to go to a family member or a police officer and tell them that you're concerned someone is a danger to themselves or others. You can't go directly and do that as part of most laws. So let's say your family member you think is suicidal and they have access to weapons. So you would ask for a temporary restraining order from a judge, and that judge would have to make the decision as to whether that should be granted. And it includes due process. So this is what we hear all the time from people who oppose these laws. And in fact, these laws do include a way for someone to go in and say, I am a danger, I'm not a danger, provide proof. And again, I also want to be clear that this is temporary. This is just long enough, and it depends on the state you're in, to determine whether you should have access to guns. These laws are so effective, particularly in stopping suicide, also mass shootings, also domestic gun violence. And in the 4 states where they have been charged or countered in state courts, Colorado, Florida, Indiana, Connecticut, they have been found to be constitutionally sound. So there is no issue about due process or whether they're constitutional. They are. But as I was saying, if they're not incentivized, if they're not implemented, that law is no good. So we have to go in and educate police officers and citizens that this is a tool at their disposal. We do that at Moms Demand Action through farmers markets and advertising, all different ways to try to educate people about these laws. But this $750 million, I think, won't even just be used by these 19 states in DC. I think it will encourage other states to pass these laws.
Real quickly, Shannon, tell us the evidence that red flag laws work.
So there's a lot of evidence around suicide. Some of the longest laws in place, Connecticut, Indiana, the data is often focused on suicide, and that it actually saves something like, for every one restraining order out of 10, it saves a life. That's very significant, right? Whether it's stopping a suicide or a mass shooting or a domestic gun violence incident. So we know that these laws work. I think a really good example of where they've been successful is San Diego. The officials in San Diego are so incredibly supportive and have used it probably more than any other jurisdiction in the entire country. So if anyone interested out there in more information on this, I would Google San Diego and red flag laws, and you can see all the different cases where they've disarmed incredibly dangerous people, stopping one of these shootings before it was too late. And that's also a really important point, which is almost all of these horrific shooting tragedies that we've seen recently include warning signs, right? Thus the name red flag law. And so we just are giving a tool to people to act on them.
Okay, so the bill provides more money for does it expand red flag laws or just gives money to educate people about them?
It incentivizes and implements them, and I think it will encourage more states to adopt them. Again, they're constitutionally sound, they have bipartisan support, they're not all in blue states. This is something I think we could really work and expand in the next legislative session, and maybe even include teachers in more of them. Like where I live in California, teachers can access red flag laws.
I'm wondering about the Uvalde shooter. Obviously, he came from this really screwed up, dysfunctional family from all accounts, right?
Yes.
Not a healthy relationship with the parents, kind of absentee, I understand. So the red flag law wouldn't have really stopped him from purchasing a gun, would it have?
We actually think that there are two things in this new federal legislation, and we'll talk about the other one in a second. But the fact that there were so many red flags, police were at this person's home over a dozen times because of domestic disputes between the parents. A knife collection was confiscated.
Well, that was in Highland Park, right?
Oh, sorry, Uvalde. You're right. Okay, so let's go. Unfortunately, there's so many tragedies that they are getting mixed up. So in Uvalde, that to me is again another. Let's move to another part of this legislation that passed. So it establishes enhanced background checks for purchasers under the age of 21. So yes, there were some red flags in Uvalde. However, to your point, we're not really sure if they were robust enough, but Texas doesn't even have a red flag law, right? So if we look at the enhanced background check process now for those under 21, that means that if you are 18, 19, 20, you will have a more rigorous background check than you would if you were over the age of 21. Now, we know 18 to 20-year-olds commit homicides, gun homicides, triple the rate of anyone over the age of 21. And since 2018, 6 of the 10 deadliest mass shootings in this country have been committed by people under the age of 21. So these people that are under the age of 21, mostly men, will not be able to just go into a store and walk right out with an assault weapon like we saw in Uvalde. There are going to be more checks with state and local law enforcement, and there will be just more checks in general on these people before they're able to get a gun.
But why should they be able to purchase a gun at 18? Why not just raise the age altogether to 21? I think this is where there's been criticism of the legislation, that it really kind of is around the edges. Was that just too hard to get Republicans to vote for?
Yep. So we have been working on raising the age state by state, and we have done it in many states. But this was something, a point of contention. Senator Murphy has said that Republicans just would not come to the table on raising the age across the board. You know, I want to be clear that right now the gun lobby is working very hard in states and even at the federal level, which is why voting is so important in this upcoming election. They want to lower the age, not just for long guns to 18 across the board, but they also would love to do it for handguns. And as I said, people who are between 18 and 20 commit gun homicides triple the rate of people over the age of 21. So imagine the mayhem and the chaos that will ensue if we make guns even easier for teenagers to get.
All right. So, so you're talking about it red flag laws, more robust background checks for people between at age of 18 and 21. Is that right?
Right. So the federal age to buy a handgun is 21. It is not, there is no federal age established for long guns. A long gun is a semi-automatic rifle.
Which is so insane.
I know. It is. And some of these.
Talking to Shannon Watts, who's head of Moms Demand Action, about the legislation that passed on Capitol Hill. There was a ceremony yesterday at the White House with a lot of gun safety advocacy groups, and Shannon is coming to us from Washington. She's just helping us understand what this law does and doesn't do. Go ahead, Shannon. Sorry.
Katie, I want to go back. I started talking about Highland Park when we were talking about Uvalde, but I want to go to Highland Park once again. I really think that's also a combination of both red flag laws and this new gating factor for those under the age of 21, right? There were so many warning signs and so many red flags about this kid
But he was 21.
He was 19 when his dad co-signed for a FOID card for him.
21 when this happened.
Yes. So, but when he was a teen, he was exhibiting warning signs. Police had been called to his house over a dozen times because of domestic violence between his parents. A knife collection was confiscated. We're not sure if it was his or his father's. And yet months later, at age 19, his father co-signed on a FOID card in Illinois so that he could go buy 5 guns, including semi-automatic rifles, right? So this enhanced background check for people under the age of 21, plus the police having access to a red flag law, which they did but didn't use, that could make a real difference.
So the red flag would have been, hey, we've come to this kid's house.
Yes.
At all these instances, and as a result, not only red flag laws, but now these enhanced background checks would, even if his father co-signed something, would have required a more robust background check.
Exactly.
By these long guns. Well, wait, I have to ask you, Shannon, why can't they reinstate the assault weapons ban? I mean, all these, and do a buyback program, because there's so many out there that it's only as good as the weapons that are also confiscated, which I guess is the big talking point of the NRA. But why couldn't that happen?
You've asked a very complicated question. So we know that shootings truly spiked, especially mass shootings, after the assault weapons ban was repealed. We should reinstate the assault weapons ban in this country, full stop. But it's nuanced, because the gun lobby was able to get around the assault weapons ban by manufacturing guns that just had slight cosmetic differences, right, than assault weapons that exist. So there is that issue, which they always point to. It's difficult to do a blanket ban. The other issue is that some states have had an appetite for it and tried to pass it, but it's not failed. Since I've been started doing this work for a decade, we have passed an assault weapons ban in exactly one state, the state of Delaware, and that was last week. We've also passed assault weapons bans in cities, so in municipalities, Boulder, Pittsburgh, Highland Park. Some of these are going to come into question now because of the SCOTUS ruling recently. There are also high capacity magazine limits that are very important that we're passing state by state. And the reason is, and it sounds very macabre because it is, but often these assault weapons will malfunction when someone is firing. And so if you have a less high capacity, so say 10 or 12 bullets, it gives people a chance to run away. Data
Well,
actually shows that.
that's what happened with Gabby Gifford, Shannon. You know,
Yes.
someone tackled the shooter, and he wasn't able to reload one of these high capacity magazines. Which, you know, for people who aren't familiar with guns, I mean, they can have how many rounds in some of these high capacity magazines?
Oh, dozens. But the other issue is that Cornyn has said this is a non-starter. In fact, I think I just read this on Twitter today. You know, he said this is something that Republicans absolutely will not come to the table on. So if you support an assault weapons ban, then it is so important to vote for gun sense candidates. We have a website called gunsensevoter.org where you can go see where your candidates stand on this issue. The last point I want to make, mass shootings are horrific because there is such a high body count. They get so much attention. But the reality is that it's about 1% of the gun violence in this country, right? Most gun violence, the gun violence that kills over 110 Americans every day, wounds hundreds more, is carried out with handguns. And that's, you know, we can't lose focus. I think because we pay attention to mass shootings, because we see these assault weapons, it becomes our focus, but we have to look at this issue more holistically and be activists in a way that treats all gun violence.
Yeah. So we're talking about red flag laws, better background checks. What
Yep.
else was in the
Okay.
legislation?
It addresses what we have called the dating partner loophole. So right now, federal law says that you are only a prohibited gun purchaser if you've been convicted of domestic abuse, if you are a spouse, if you cohabitate with someone, or if you've had children with them. Women, and that's the primary victim of domestic gun violence, women are waiting longer to get married. So now you are just as likely to be killed by a dating partner as you are by a spouse in this country. But the legislation is old, right? So that's why we call this the dating partner loophole. And so this really just expands the definition of who a domestic abuser is, to include not just abused spouses, but also people who are abused by dating partners. You know, I'll give you an example. You know, Bob and Sally have been dating seriously. They're not married. Bob is abusing Sally. He's convicted of domestic violence, a misdemeanor, and now he is prohibited for at least 5 years of possessing guns. That will save thousands of lives. About 70 women are shot and killed by an intimate partner every single month in this country.
Okay, so those are three things. What else?
There's more. Okay. It also clarifies who can run a background check in this country. So, you know, we have licensed sellers, licensed dealers in this country. They are covered by federal law. We also, and you know this very well, you did an amazing movie about this. We also have unlicensed sellers, right? They're selling guns at gun shows. They're selling guns online. They don't have to do background checks. So now we are making it clearer through law of who has to run a background check. So for an example, someone who is selling guns for profit online at gun shows, like the person who sold the mass shooter a gun in Midland, Odessa, if you remember that horrific mass shooting, he should not have had a gun. Those sellers will be placed on notice to say, you need to become a licensed dealer, which means then you have to conduct background checks and you have to keep the appropriate records.
But do you think that'll really work? I mean, I hate to say it, Shannon, but people who are doing it from the back of their trucks or at gun shows or, you know, online, whatever, just person to person, does that really have any teeth to require them? I have a hard time being convinced that will be enough to make them comply with the regulations.
Certainly not all, and certainly not in states that have incredibly lax gun laws and governors who don't care. However, some more good news is that today at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, it sounds like there will be a vote in the Senate for a new ATF director. We have not had an ATF director full-time in this country, a permanent director, for nearly 7 years. That's on purpose. Again, you know this. The NRA has hobbled the ATF. And with a strong director in place, I do think all of these laws will have more teeth.
So anything else that we're not including in the legislation?
Yes. And wait, there's more.
Wait.
Okay, so it will help fund community violence intervention programs. These programs are so incredibly important, especially in a post-COVID world, right? Because these community violence intervention programs know their communities, they have relationships, and they can stop retaliatory gun violence before it begins. That's what so much city gun violence is in this country, right? And so the data shows these programs work. I'm on the board of Advance Peace, which started in California. They have amazing results in preventing retaliatory gun violence. And so this legislation unlocks 250 million more dollars. We've already unlocked hundreds and hundreds of millions. This just adds to it. And really, there's so much racial inequality in gun violence and how it impacts communities of color. And so these dollars will really help the communities that are most impacted, and also beef up trauma responsive services. It also allocates about $2 billion in community mental health services. 6 in 10 gun deaths in this country are suicides. And so this will give some of the mental health resources that are needed to maybe prevent those. It gives $1.35 billion for evidence-based school gun violence prevention efforts. Often it's teachers and school districts that are on the front line.
And so Sandy Hook Promise is something that
yes.
Barton started, and it has been very effective at thwarting some of these mass shootings at schools.
They've done an amazing job through Sandy Hook Promise, and Mark and Nicole are great friends. So great program, and that's really the gist of this legislation. What I just outlined to you, again, I wish it was the whole enchilada, but what it is life-saving. And it is a step forward, and it breaks this logjam that has been in place for a generation.
Well, talk about why you think it's so important also politically. And, people get frustrated, like me. Why isn't more being done? Because, I care deeply about this issue. But talk us all through about how sort of social change can sometimes come in incremental steps, even though it may drive us slightly crazy.
Yes. So, my motto is incremental change leads to revolutions. And if we look at any social issue in this country, it all starts with baby steps. And I get that it's frustrating. I've been a full-time volunteer for a decade. I've had my share of frustration. I really did think when I got involved after the Sandy Hook school shooting tragedy, we would have wholesale change in weeks or months. I really did. But it's not the way the system is set up. The system is set up for the hard, unglamorous, heavy lifting of grassroots activism, which I frankly think women are the special sauce for, because, when you raise kids, if nothing else, that it is incremental, and you have to stick with it. You have to show up at every gun bill hearing. You have to create relationships with your lawmakers. And, I want to tell a quick anecdote. When we were working on what was called the Manchin-Toomey bill in 2013, right after the Sandy Hook school shooting, we were a fledgling organization. We were doing our best. But at the end of the day, even Democrats like Heidi Heitkamp from North Dakota voted against the legislation. And she said the reason was she heard 5-1 from opponents. And we were saying to ourselves, this will never happen again. We are going to build this grassroots army that will never allow anyone to say that is why they voted against gun safety legislation, when we know the vast majority of Americans want it. This time, we sent over 1 million messages to our senators. And Senator Todd Young of Indiana, not exactly a purple or blue state, said the reason he was going to vote for the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act was because he was hearing from his constituents 10-1 in favor of it. So it's grassroots activism that works. And look, I think that this Congress is pretty intractable on a lot of issues. So we have to go local, whether it's ballot initiatives or encouraging our states to do the right thing, or passing through city councils or through school boards. Just in the last 4 weeks, we have passed sweeping gun reform legislation through Rhode Island, through Delaware, through New York, through California, through New Jersey. We have passed major policies through city councils in Colorado and Virginia, and even in Ohio, where you may have seen that the governor just signed a bill allowing teachers to be armed. We've gotten so many school districts to say, nope, you're not going to arm teachers where we live. So it is about getting off the sidelines and getting involved.
Hey, I want to just share a couple of questions from my very smart followers. Why can't automatic rifles be separated from single or double shot hunting rifles or long guns?
Well, you know, in some places, like for example, recently in Rhode Island, a law was passed that said you can't open carry unless you're doing it for hunting. And that's what a lot of these open carry laws were passed for in the first place. It was about taking your gun from the car to the hunting grounds, but they've been exploited by gun rights activists who are saying, you know, we need to have access to all weapons for all reasons, anytime, anywhere, no questions asked. And so this very vocal minority has essentially been writing our gun laws. But depending on the state you live in, you know, these are conversations that we should be having with our lawmakers.
Somebody said, do you realize that to regulate guns, anything that costs money is interstate and under the purview of the feds? Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Let's not. Okay. Oh, yes. Yes. Somebody's asking about the interruption of the ceremony yesterday by Manny. Why don't you give some background about Manny's frustration? He lost his son, Joaquin, in Parkland, Manny Alvaro. Can you tell us what happened? People were saying that sort of dominated the news cycle yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. You know, that kind of thing always does, and that's fine. I adore Manny. I respect Manny. I am not a gun violence survivor. I'm not going to tell Manny how to do his activism. I think there's a really important, valuable role for people who are always saying it's not enough. And I think that's fair. This bill isn't enough. We do need more. And I think he was standing up and saying that in honor of his son. And so both things can be true. This is an incredibly important step forward and a law that will save lives. And I think it shows Republicans the political sky won't fall because they did what the vast majority of Americans want. But I also see Manny's point of view, which is we got to keep going. But I don't agree that this gives Republicans an excuse to say we're not going to do any more on this issue. We've never seen that before. I mean, when the Voting Rights Act happened in 1965, there were so many incremental pieces of legislation that so many found frustrating beforehand, but that was the culmination ultimately. And I think this issue is very similar. Look, the gun lobby has a 30-year head start. And so what we have accomplished, I think, in a decade is miraculous.
And what if we want more progress made? What are about people watching this, Shannon, who say, okay, we got this done. We need to keep going and use this as a foundation for even more laws that will protect us?
They are exactly right. I really do think there is a lot of energy in this country, and women make up the majority of the voting public. And they also are swing voters. I mean, if you look at the polling, I think the reason Mitch McConnell voted for this bill, this gun safety bill, was because he knows gun safety voters are the new swing voters. And I think abortion is similar too. So if we can harness this energy going into the midterm elections, we can move mountains. I really truly believe we can hold the Senate. And I'm not going to lose hope on the House. I think that if we go and use our voices and our votes on this issue and show our outrage to lawmakers who aren't protecting us, you know, women make up about 10% of the 500,000 elected positions in this country. And when you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu, as they say. And we are on the menu over and over again. We are on the menu in November. So I do believe that is the first good chance we have to show our lawmakers that we want action on these issues.
And you think Republicans are going to be rewarded for supporting this legislation in November? The small number of Republicans that did. How many Republicans ended up for this?
I think it was 10. I need to go. It feels like a lifetime ago now, yeah. But there was like 60 votes altogether. But I also want to be clear that we're going to hold every Republican who voted no accountable, right? So Republicans and as a party don't get a pass because they helped us pass this legislation. If they voted no, we need to scream and shout about that between now and November, state and federal, anyone who doesn't support this legislation. So that's the next best step. I want to be clear that right now we are asking in Illinois that lawmakers, and if anyone lives in Illinois, they should be reaching out to their lawmaker and saying there's a special session in September about abortion. That should also include guns, right? There are a lot of things we can do, including an assault weapons ban in the state of Illinois. And then in January is when most legislative sessions start in this country. And when I tell you we have changed the calculus just by showing up dozens or hundreds of us in red shirts on the issue of guns, I mean, we have a track record of stopping the NRA's agenda 90% of the time every year for the last 7 years. And we've passed hundreds of good gun bills, right? So women just need to decide they're going to find a piece of this work that they're passionate about and just keep, as you said, keep going.
Hey, Shannon, you know, when you talk about the assault weapons ban, Highland Park had an assault weapons ban. And yet this happens at a 4th of July parade. How do you explain that? Because I think people think, well, you know, that makes them feel that nothing is going to solve this problem.
Well, I'm not sure where he bought it. He bought his guns. I'm going to guess it was not in Highland Park. He also dressed up as a woman and hid his assault rifle in his clothing, right? So he was not easily identifiable. As we said, Illinois generally does not have an assault weapons ban. That's what we're hoping that we can fix in September.
Got it. Okay, well, this was really helpful. Just in closing, can you talk one more time about what's just ticked down, what's in the bill, and what we still need to try to accomplish at a state level or with more federal legislation? Then I'm going to clip it off and I'm going to send it into the atmosphere and hopefully people will see.
So funding for red flag laws, we need to educate people about the fact that they're in their state. If they are one of the states that has them, 19 states now and Washington, D.C., we want more states to pass red flag laws too. It also closes the dating partner loophole. So now dating partners are prohibited purchasers for at least 5 years, which is important because about 70 women are shot and killed by intimate partners every single month in this country.
These are dating partners who have been charged with domestic violence.
Exactly. And as many dating partners as spouses are now victims in this country. It enhances background check for people under the age of 21. So they won't just be able to go into a gun store and walk out with an assault rifle anymore. They're going to go through more rigorous background checks. It clarifies who has to run a background check. So if you're an unlicensed seller and you're selling a lot of guns for profit, you will need to become a licensed dealer. It cracks down on gun trafficking. So before now, prosecutors who wanted to fight this really had to cobble together a whole bunch of paperwork violations. And this really gives law enforcement the tools they need to prosecute upstream offenders and crack down on trafficking. As I said, it funds community violence intervention programs. It unlocks over $250 million more dollars for the communities that are most impacted, Black and brown communities in this country. It allocates about $2 billion to community mental health services. We know 6 of every 10 gun deaths in this country are suicides. So this could really be helpful in preventing those. It unlocks $1.35 billion for school-based violence prevention efforts. It really works to make sure that staff and kids aren't traumatized and that we are having conversations about gun violence in schools. And so that's really the gist of the legislation. It does a lot of things. Those are the most important, and it will save thousands and thousands of lives.
And it's a start.
It is the first step on a longer journey.
Shannon Watts, always great to talk to you. Please run for office, Shannon, won't you?
Will you be my campaign manager?
I will. I'll be your press secretary. You would be so awesome. And you've learned so much. And I just think you would be a fantastic elected official, locals, you know, state, whatever you think. I'd be totally behind you.
Thank you, Katie. That means a lot.
Anyway, all right. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thank you for the update, Shannon. Thank you for explaining the legislation. Super helpful.
Great. Wonderful.
Okay, talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.